4, 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, and thank you for being here on a weekend, especially on a Sunday. Although it is indeed true that the learning never ends and that we are all students throughout our lives of something or the other. It is in this spirit that we decided to bring you the Objective Student Career Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. This is a conclave where some of the most experienced professionals across industries address students, informing them about their fields, their secrets of success, and about their careers. In the sessions ahead, across the next 2 weeks, the Objective Students Career Conclave will be covering a large number and a large variety of topics, and not only about photography, but on everything from writing books and to having a great on screen presence. So far, we have had three excellent speakers speaking on subjects ranging from the importance of mentorship to what it takes to be a good student in photography to what makes a good photographer. Today's session promises to be extremely interesting, particularly because the speaker for this evening is Saumya Khandelwal, a photographer who, in a very short span of time, went from being a student to National Geographic, to being a National Geographic photographer. And she is going to be speaking about the basics of photography. But just before we have Saumya come on board, we have a short talk by HP. Once again, to all who are with us, all of you who are viewing, thank you for being with us. I'm sure that all of you are just waiting for Soumya to come and speak. But just before we do that, please let me introduce you to Divya Ved from HP, who will be speaking about the HP Chromebook series of laptops. These are multifunctional laptops, especially perfect for students, and they fit many requirements actually. Divya is here to speak about just this. Divya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Madhavan. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session. I hope all of you are doing well by maintaining social distancing and keeping yourself safe and healthy. My name is Divya Ved. I feel we all have a better understanding how technology is an enabler, how it helps you gain education as well explore your creativity. So let me just make you go through some features of Chromebook which can be really useful for study or work during these times. What is Chromebook and why is it important? A Chromebook is a laptop which is based only on Google operating system. To all those who don't wish to go for Windows and just keep it simple to a browser, choose a Chromebook where it makes work much more easy because of its five major USPs like speed, security, simplicity, shareable, and smart. Let's start with speed. It boots under 10 seconds. No long load times, no confusing setup. Chrome OS is designed to be light and fast updates automatically in background, so it doesn't slow over time and no manual intervention. Security. Security from the start verified boot, perform self-checks to repair any system corruptions, always ready security with built-in virus protection and auto-update sandboxing. Web pages and apps run in isolated environment to prevent infection from at-risk pages. Simplicity. Familiar, easy to use, no setup needed, just log in with Google account. Familiar and intuitive Chrome and Android ecosystem, 1 million plus Android apps from Play Store for work, play, create, watch, and listen. Shareable. Collaborate on project on Google Docs, sheets, and slides with automatic saving of files. Connect. Create collaborate files are backed up in cloud and are available anytime across all the devices. Easy multi-accounts login for everyone. Just switch the account and get personalized experience. Smart. Learn, adapt, evolve, built-in Google Assistant feature for faster and smarter work without lifting a finger or switching screens. Make Google do it. Access the Chromebook with Smart Lock on the phone with local language inbuilt. Work in any language. Now coming to the next most impressive part, how can Chromebooks can be used for work from home as well as learn from home. By reimagining your office, Chromebooks are secure, simple, and shareable devices that help you stay productive and connected. Here are some useful or helpful tips for working from home. Simple setup, setting up an HP Chromebook is easy. Simply log in to your Google account to get going and access all your Google Drives, files, and Chrome preferences on your Chromebook. Apps that get the job done, Google Play provide access to apps for getting work done like Microsoft Word, Google Doc, as well as video conferencing app for collaborating remotely with teams like Google Meet and Zoom. Now, no monitor, no problem. Cast your Chrome browser tabs on Chromecast enabled TVs or use virtual desk to expand your desktop. Work safely from home. Chromebooks keep you and your data safe from malware thanks to multiple layers of security and automatic updates. Learn from home. Keep on learning. Chromebooks are secure, simple, and shareable devices that help you stay productive and connected. Here are some helpful tips for continuing to learn and study at home. Apps for study and learning. Google Play provides access to essential apps for studying at home and connecting with others in real time, like Google Docs, Google Meet, and Zoom. Study safely from home. Chromebooks keep you and your data safe. Now, why Chromebooks is special for students? World of Android apps on laptop. A laptop that runs over a million of your favorite Android apps and more for a bigger, more immersive experience. For example, gaming apps, streaming apps, office, editing apps at certain level. Voice enabled Google Assistant works on your speech and words. Play, send mails, and setups. All HP Chromebooks are Google Assistant enabled. And last but not the least, let me tell you about extraordinary feature of Chromebook. Chromebooks work offline as well. No Wi-Fi, no problem. HP Chromebooks have access to a lot of apps that work online or offline, just like any other laptop. So you can do things like edit docs with Google Docs and Microsoft Word, watch movies with Prime Video, Netflix app, download playlists with Ghana or Spotify, whatever app you like, play games in offline game apps. Chromebooks have Microsoft Office for free. Now, Microsoft Office available on Google Play Store where you can download the apps you want, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, work on Microsoft Office programs free from Chrome Web Store. You can also open, edit, and save Microsoft file in Google Drive. It has enough storage for all your work. HP Chromebooks come with hard drive plus cloud storage plus micro SD card slot. That is triple whammy. 64 GB SSD on board, 100 GB Google Cloud, 256 GB expandable micro SD. It's all equal to 420 GB space. It has G Suite for education. Communicate, collaborate, manage, and administer. You can add students, manage devices, and configure device for security data. So thank you so much. That's all from my side. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patient listening. I request all of you to please go and explore Chromebook at HP World Store. Thank you so much. Over to you, Madhvan.
Thank you, Divya, for detailing out the many features of the HP Chromebook for us. Our main speaker for today is Saumya Khandelwal. As I had mentioned earlier, she will be speaking on the topic the elemental basics of photography. In today's webinar, Saumya will touch upon the rules of composition, exposing for light with the help of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, and how you can make the best use of the various modes in your camera. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about Saumya. She is a Getty Images Instagram grantee in 2017 for her work Child Brides of Shavasti. Soumya's work focuses on gender and environmental issues. Nominated for the World Press Photo 6x6 Global Talent Program from Asia region in 2019, Soumya has built a diverse body of work spanning journalism and documentary genres of photography over the past 6 years. She has previously worked with the Thomson Reuters and the Hindustan Times. She has contributed to National Geographic, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and The Guardian, Bloomberg Business Week, Stern, Der Spiegel, MIT Technology Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, Vanity Fair, Caravan, etc., and NGOs like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Malala Fund, Path India, etc. Recipient of the National Foundation of India Award 2017, Soumya's work has also been widely exhibited at Getty Images Gallery, London, India Photo Festival, Hyderabad, and the Goa Photo Festival, and digitally exhibited at Women in Photography Slideshow, Singapore. Soumya, thank you so much for joining us today. It's indeed a pleasure to have you on board. The stage is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Madhvan, for the very generous introduction. And I'm grateful to Better Photography and HP for having me talk about photography. It's kind of exciting for me because a lot of photography that I talk about is so much on the level of documentary projects that it's very refreshing for me to come back to the basics myself. Uh, when I'm going to be talking about photography today, I also acknowledge the fact that a lot of people who probably be watching the webinar today would probably be shooting on phones, because as we know, a lot of photography that we do and in very good quality can now happen on mobile phones. So allow me to digress a bit and not approach it in the traditional form of the various technicalities, because for a lot of us who've done away with a digital SLR in preference of equipments which are easier to handle, I believe we as educators need to adapt in the same direction as well. Uh, at the onset, I want to thank a lot of people who have agreed to let me share their photographs. I'm going to be showing you photographs from various photographers from India. They are among the better ones that we have in the country right now, and also there are just as many more out there. It was just so many photographers I could get on board to allow me to share their photographs. Uh, I would like to begin with the most basic thing in photography. Whenever we're talking about photography, photography is painting with light, right? And how does an equipment or any, a camera or a phone camera or a, a compact camera that a lot of us use, how do they really capture light? Uh, the the settings at which we capture light and what makes a photograph good is called exposure, and the exposure is basically a combination of three elements. It's called the ISO or ASA in the film days, then there's the shutter speed, and then there's aperture. uh, Allow me to talk about this right from the first one, that's ISO, and I'm going to be making reference to the film days. And again, I don't know how many of you have seen a film camera, but before we got the digital cameras and phones that we're currently shooting on, we had cameras where we needed to roll films, and a typical camera, a typical roll of film would have a 36 by 24 size frame with about 36 photographs that you could shoot in one roll. So that's the place from where the term ISO/ASA comes from, which basically refers to the sensitivity of the recording medium. In the olden days, it was a film. In the digital era, our photographs are captured in what is called a sensor. And when I'm saying that it determines the sensitivity of the sensor, I basically mean that if I have to shoot in the night time, I would want my camera to be more sensitive or receptive to light for it to capture more details. For example, if I'm sitting in a setting like this versus if I'm out there in the sun, the bandwidth of colors that our naked eyes see is not the kind of bandwidth a camera has. The camera is way more restricted than our eyes, and therefore it needs to push itself even more in order to record it. So ISO is basically read in terms of 100, 200, 400, 800, 16, and so on and so forth. The more the ISO, the more is the sensitivity of the sensor, which means the better it can capture in lower light. So the first element of exposure is ISO. The second element that we're going to talk about today will be the shutter speed. Also, while I'm talking about it, allow me to demonstrate it to you in the most lightest ways how it would translate in a typical camera. So if this is your sensor, which is in the camera body, the shutter would be in front of the sensor and it would be a part of the camera body itself. And imagine shutter as a sort of a curtain, right? So if this is your sensor, the shutter kind of keeps your sensor protected from the light. And then when you press the shutter, the curtain goes up and comes back. So when I'm talking about the shutter speed, I'm basically talking about how much time will this curtain expose the sensor for. And therefore, when we're talking about the shutter speed, we're talking about one, as you see on the bottom right, one being 1 second. And we move on upwards to 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, so on and so forth. So we basically talk about 1/8 of a second. And as we go higher up, we can go up to, depending on the potential of the cameras, but we could go up to 1/1000 of a second as well. And I will again come back and talk to you about where are these various settings important and how can we really use it in our favor. Now, we have talked about the sensor and now we've talked about the curtain. The third thing that there is the aperture, which is located in the lens of the camera. The lens of the camera is basically this round thing that you see protruding out of the cameras, which a lot of photographers you'll see who shooting professionally move around as per their desire. There's this one thing in the called the aperture in the lens, which is the third level of recording the light. So you could imagine an aperture as a circle like this, which can keep going smaller and which can keep going bigger, right? If it's bigger, it allows for more light to enter. If it's smaller, it allows for lesser light to enter and reach the sensor. We talk about aperture in terms of f-stops, and you write it as f/the number. So in this case, you'll see starting from the left, it's f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, so on and so forth. Now, what do these three elements basically do when you're capturing a photograph? We're going to move on to each of them. We begin with the shutter speed. This photograph that I have here is basically a photograph of a sadhu taking with drenched hair, and he's kind of that he's taking his head back, so it's with the speed and the water is all coming out. But you see that the water is all sharp. The water has been sharp because the photographer decided to shoot it at a very high shutter speed. When I say high shutter speed, I typically mean 1/500 and above. So here the photographer must have probably been shooting at 1/1000 of a second to get all of the water sharp. And this is what you can achieve at a higher shutter speed. So where let's imagine where can we really use it. For example, if you're shooting sports, if there's someone who's running, if there's someone who's jumping or hopping, or if there are kids playing, high shutter speed works great because it freezes your motion. So what would low shutter speed do on the contrary? This is an image of low shutter speed. This image would probably be shot at about 30 seconds. So the photographer must have kept, and it's an image of a traffic jam, which is why you see these red tail lights at the back. So the photographer has placed the camera on a tripod and allowed the camera to be exposed for 30 seconds, which is why you see all these lines moving around. And another thing that you notice is all the street lights are kind of making a star, right? The star in the street lights basically forms if you are at a very small aperture, which we'll come back to again later. But what the photographer has essentially done is the photographer has probably done a setting of about 30 seconds and an aperture of about f16 to achieve these results. Now, this image is basically of a shore, and this white pattern that you see is water. Now, as compared to the first image that we saw, which is this one, where the water that you see is very sharp, you see in the third image, you see distinct lines of the water, which means that the photographer shot it at a slower shutter speed, whereby the shutter speed allowed for the water to move and form patterns. So once we know how what is the effect, desired effect of a higher or lower shutter speed, as photographers, it gives us the liberty to use it to achieve a desired result. The next thing that I spoke about was an aperture, which I mentioned was sort of this eye in the lens, which decides how much it'll open for the light to enter. Apart from the fact that it allows for more or less light to open, to enter and reach the sensor, another effect that the aperture can achieve is called depth of field. What the depth of field basically means is how much of the background will be sharp while we focusing on the foreground. For example, in this image, you see that the petals of the flower at the bottom are sharp. However, behind the petals, you see there's a blur, and there's a very strong blur, which kind of works very well for this image because it makes it look very artistic and very abstract in a way. And this is what I would call a shallow depth of field. It basically means a shallow depth of field would basically mean that very little of the background is in focus. As contrary to this image, which is a landscape image. And here we see right from the front of the image, which you'll see at the bottom, to the back of the image, which you'll see at the top, is entirely in focus perceptibly to the naked eye, which is what we can achieve with a smaller aperture opening, right? So the second image that you have seen, this landscape image is probably shot at f16 and above to get the desired result. While this image that you see, depending on what lens it is, it would probably be at about f1.8. So apart from the fact of how much light it allows to enter into the sensor, the second thing that we learned is the depth of field that it helps us monitor to achieve the desired result in the background. And then what's the ISO? I said that ISO is the sensitivity of the sensor, but does it really have any other function? Not really, but one function that it really does have is that it produces a sort of a noise in the modern day that we call it, which would translate to a grain in the days of the film. Like you see the cloud, you see the texture of the clouds is kind of grainy. It's a little spotty. You know, it's kind of worked for this image because the photographer has managed to use it well and make it look like an effect of grain as there was in the film days. But if you push it too much, the noise might begin to hurt the eye. You know, that might not be a desired effect that you might like in your images because it might make the image look very different from what you thought it would be. So, which is why, depending on what camera you use, you might want to control what ISO levels you want to go up to. Now, how do we really use the combination of these three at the most basic level when we're starting off? I'm going to be imagining that a lot of you are going to be shooting on your phones, or you're going to be shooting on the various modes of your DSLR camera or a compact camera if you have one. So, what are these modes that we often see on the cameras? A lot of phone cameras now have this mode called portrait. What a portrait mode you might have noticed does is that it kind of puts the person in the foreground, the person that you're photographing in focus, while the background becomes a blur. Like in this image, there's such a beautiful tonality in the background. You know, you have the slight softness on the bottom left, which moves into the brown on the top left, and on the right hand side there are these brown shades, and you don't really see what's happening in the background. This shallow depth of field that we spoke about earlier is what a portrait mode will help you achieve. So, for example, if you want to photograph someone in your family and you want to get a good portrait of the person, the portrait mode is where you go. This is another example when the photographer decided to shoot a kid from the top. We see the kid's eyes and the face are sharp while the background is such a beautiful blur. It's not really a bokeh, but it almost forms one. The yellow spots that you see, which typically are formed because of light, and you'll see these huge dots of light behind people when they shot in the portrait mode, because that's the effect a shallow depth of field gives. So we see that the photographers managed to do this pretty well in this image. The second mode that you'll see in your DSLRs is called the landscape mode. Uh, the landscape mode again has to do with the aperture of the camera. I mentioned earlier that a shallow depth of field is what works beautifully for portraits. But when you're talking about a wide landscape, when you're going to see the Himalayas or to Ladakh, or even when you're going to a beach, you want to see the entire landscape because there's so many details there and you want to see all of them in your photographs. And a lot of times we're like, why are we not really getting the details? There are people who kind of getting blurred and we don't want that effect. That's the time when you need to move on to the landscape mode, because what the landscape mode will do is give you a very good depth of field. So you'll see in the image right from the bottom, the mountains at the bottom up to the clouds at the back are all in focus perceptibly to the eye, and which is why it kind of impresses upon us the grandeur of the place. And that's where when you're traveling and when you're on holidays, this is the mode you would work which would work great for all your landscape shots. Now, sports. uh, in some cameras you have a sports mode, and in some cameras you also have a kids mode. What both these modes are trying to do essentially is trying to help capture movement, because like any one of you who's probably had a little sibling would have noticed, whenever you're trying to chase them to get photographs, they're constantly moving, and you're just not able to get the right setting for the camera to get them sharp. And probably, and it's a kid, no matter how much you're going to tell the kid to stay at one place, the kid will probably never do that. So which is why this is the time for you to shift to the sports mode slash kids mode, because it'll help you capture action in a sharp way. In this image, you see the photographer has managed to capture the movement of the kids. They're playing with the sand and they're throwing the sand in the air, but we still see the sharpness in the sand, and we see the sharpness in their movements, and we see the smile on their faces. And this is worked great for this image, and it's helped him capture what he really wanted to, because there were kids who were in action, and he chose to photograph the image at a higher shutter speed. Likewise, in this image, there are again kids who are in motion, who are playing with kids. You just don't know what will be the next action, and which is why being ready with a sports mode slash kids mode will help you achieve sharp images. Now, the next mode is the night mode. What night mode will typically be doing is be enabling you to capture more light. Now, where is the light at night? We all know we struggling to capture light. We popping on our flashes, and then when we popping on our flashes, we just don't know how to use them effectively. And we have a foreground which is all lit up, but there are no details in the background, which is where the night mode might be helpful, because what the night mode will help you do is shoot up the ISO. You can open your shutter and your aperture. You can open up your aperture completely, which means that you can shoot at probably f2.8 or f4, and your shutter speed might kind of slow down. It might go down to 1/8, 1/16, depending on what the light situation is. But the camera will essentially try to expose the sensor for the reduced light situations outside. And for a lot of you, when you're partying at night, you might want to Rather, when you're actually trying to get landscapes at night outdoors, maybe the night mode would be a good way for you to experiment and try what you're trying to do. And then we all want to shoot macros. We want to shoot those little details of the flower. We want to shoot the little droplet coming down the window. We want to shoot a little fly sitting on the wall and kind of try to get the details. But we all struggle because whenever we're trying to do that, our camera just will not focus it right. Why does that really happen? The thing is that our lens have something that's called the minimum focusing distance. So when a lens comes, it'll probably say that it focuses at a minimum distance of about 12 inches or 6 inches, which means that anything that you're trying to keep closer, the camera will just not capture. So what the cameras are trying to do in the macro mode is to instruct the camera that now, if you're in the macro mode, I'm going to focus at a very short distance. So instead of the autofocus, which keeps bothering you and which keeps going in the background, the camera will now focus on the foreground, which is right up close, and which is where you can go out photographing flowers, and you can go out photographing all the little details of life which you've been trying to see and which you've been trying to capture, but which have been turning out to be a struggle because you just will not get the settings right. And then the thing that we all want to know, what makes a good photograph? Is it the camera? Is it the settings? Or what really is it? What makes a good photograph is something that's called mise en scène, which is how do you place elements in a frame? What are these elements that a photographer usually looks out for? Obviously, I want to put it out there that a lot of what I'm telling you today, you'll see many photographers are breaking those codes and exploring themselves in various ways. But this is a great place to start. It's only when you know all of this that you know how to take it forward. And which is where we're going to begin with light and shadows. Light is the key for photography. If you want a good photograph, start running behind light. In this image, you see how beautifully the light is reflected in the water, and which is what, apart from, we have this Mickey Mouse and we have this little girl who's floating there, and we also have the reflection of the photographer in the background, which is very interesting. But it's the entire impact of the how the light is reflected in the water which makes this photograph so beautiful. Now, we all live in houses which probably have lights coming in from some corners of the house, right? And maybe a task that you could give yourself is to explore that strand of light, maybe not just in your homes, maybe in the corridor outside your house, maybe in the garden when it kind of moves through the trees and through the leaves and it reaches, and try to see what you can do with that light. How does it really fall on things and how does it really render another life to things? Get your friends, get your family to pose for portraits for you there. But if you start noticing how light falls and how does it render different objects in different times of the day, it will change a lot about your photography. And here we see how beautifully the photographer has managed to use architecture and the way the shadows are cast in architecture to create a beautiful composition. The shadows at the bottom and at the top right have have become such a nice element which adds to the image here. Another thing that you'll see a lot of photographers do in their images is to use shapes and forms. We do see the mountains, we do see the clouds, but how do those clouds and mountains complement each other? And this is a beautiful way to tell you, what I'm saying with this image, because here the photographer has managed to establish a relationship between the mountain and the cloud and form a nice shape which makes for a photograph in itself. And now that I'm telling you that, I think it will be an opportune time for you to start noticing shapes and forms and everything around you. You don't necessarily have to see forms as a whole. You can also see forms in parts, a part of the cloud, a part of the mountain. And once you start establishing those relationships, you'll see that your images will start getting better. And this is such a beautiful image where you don't see the head of the man, but you see a cloud replaced by the head. And that's a beautiful juxtaposition that the photographer has managed to do. And not just not it's not just that the shape is interesting in itself, but the shape which is in the background also establishes a relationship with the back foreground. And I want to use this image to talk about how we as photographers need to be conscious of these two elements in our photographs. We have the foreground, which we always look at when we're picking up our camera. But what we also need to pay a lot of attention to is the background. Here the photographer wanted the clouds at the head of the, at where was supposedly the head of the man was supposed to be. But a lot of times we as photographers forget to notice a pole coming out behind the head of a man, or we forget to notice that awkwardly placed leaf coming out of the ear of the person we're trying to photograph, because we're just looking at the foreground and not the background. And if we try to notice that, we'll see that our images become much more well thought. This is another image where you see a repetition in forms, because there are these number of kids wearing the same dhoti and they're in the same position, which means that the patterns and the forms are repeating. The shapes formed by their hands, their legs, and the dhotis are repeating, which is what is making the image very interesting. I would also like everyone who's watching this to notice the backgrounds. It's very important to notice that the backgrounds are so well thought. And despite the fact that in a lot of images you might see chaos in the background, the photographer has still managed to place them in a way where it really appeals to the photograph. The next thing is space. As a photographer, when we're photographing anything, our natural instinct is to just pick up the camera and compose the subject in the middle of the frame. But did we really try playing with the space? Here, the photographer has managed to leave most of the frame empty. It's just floor, and there are these leading lines. You see a line leading from the bottom left to the back, and then there are these lines all throughout the carpet that you see. And then the real subject, the women who are praying, are at the top left of the frame, right? And I think that's a beautiful way to consider how do we really want to compose our image. Maybe every time you're going out shooting, there is obviously the rule of thirds that a lot of us have heard about. The rule of thirds basically talks about that you don't place your subject in the center of the frame, but try to place it at 1/3 or 2/3 position, which is great. But why not experiment with space in the sense of let's place the subject anywhere in the frame and see how does it really work in terms of composition. Maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 times you'll fail, but maybe one time you'll find an interesting composition when you're trying to frame the subject differently. Here again, for a lot of photographers, the natural instinct would be to, when they see something like this, would be just to photograph the man who's sitting on the bench. But look at the addition that the shadows are making to the frame. We have the shadows of the branches, which are leading us to the center, and we have all these shadows of the leaves, which are adding a very interesting pattern on the floor, on the ground. And then once we led into the blackness in the center of the frame, the blackness very nicely surrounds that man sitting at the top left. So, in a lot of ways, these lines that we see in the shadows are leading us to the man who's sitting at the top left. And that is one thing that I I'll tell you really works well in terms of your composition. Not just look at your main subject, but look at how the elements around the subject add and contribute to your photograph. It's about the lines that lead to the subject. It's about the little details in the surroundings of people, which will probably make your images way more interesting than you thought. Also, at this point of time, I want to talk about the corners of the frame. While a lot of us compose the person we're trying to photograph or compose the scene very well, we often forget to look at the corners of our frame. We might just have a bag hanging on the wall which is half cut, or we might just have a half cut shoe lying on the floor, or we might just have a very interesting detail that we missed out in the frame because we did not notice it while we shooting. So next time while you're picking up your camera, make sure you're noticing the edges of your frame, and you try to be very cautious or very mindful of what you're trying to include. And then we want to balance our frame, you know. Is there a way to get in more than one elements in the frame? And if there is, how do we really balance it? Here we see there's so many elements in the frame. There's someone who's coming up the stairs. There is this beautiful painting in the back of the stairs. There's someone sitting on the left who's facing inside the frame, and then there are people sitting on the right hand side who are again facing inside the frame. So in a lot of ways, all these elements kind of balance out each other. It's not like the right side of the frame is absolutely empty, or it's not like the left side of the frame is absolutely empty and it makes the photograph look incomplete. All these elements add up together to balance each other out. And that's how the photographer manages to create a well balanced frame. This will also mean that you need to be mindful of whether you can balance your foreground and background. Here, the photographers manage to get a silhouette in the foreground while there's another person standing in the background. And then there's this entire curtain that's coming on the top, which balances out the frame beautifully. And each of these elements kind of lead to the other, you know. The silhouetted man leads us to the man at the back, and that man at the back leads us to the nice dome that the curtain is creating on the top. This image is also a very good example of what are the other elements of a photograph that a photographer's used. You see the stitching lines of the frame that the photographers used, which kind of ensure that the top of the frame does not look empty. You have the little shadows of the trees in the background, which are there in the frame right in the center as a little dark shadow on the curtain. And then you have these leading lines of the floor which lead you to the back of the frame. So for photographers who are very mindful about their frames, they'll be looking at all these elements to put them together. And then there is a thing that you'll see a lot of photographers do, which is to create layers. Now, what is layers really in terms of a photograph? You could imagine it as different planes in a photograph, you know. If you talk about the first level, if I were standing in front of the scene, what is the first thing in terms of proximity that I have? It's the elephant, right? The next thing after the elephant is the wall, and behind the wall is the man. So we see that the photographer has managed to get these three layers in a photograph together in a very neat way. You know, there's no mess in the background. Everything is very well placed and well thought, and the photographers managed to place all of this very well and create layers in the frames. What the layers also does is kind of create a depth in the photograph, which uh, you know, to me as a viewer, it makes me engage with the photograph for longer. Likewise, in this image, the photographer has managed to create a foreground with a lady in the red. Further away in the background, you see a man in white, and farther away in the background, you see the mountains. And all of this is very neatly placed, very well thought of. There is no chaos in the background. You see the face of the man at the background very clearly, and the pattern of the man holding the gamcha or the patta, or whatever it is, the back, is is kind of replicating the pattern in front of the woman holding the dupatta. So this is how photographers work in layers to lead the audience from one frame to the other. And while all of this is great to know, I always think we learn best when we see more images and when we see the works of photographers who've been there before us and who've pushed the limits in terms of the medium. So I want to introduce everyone to a couple of names whose works, a couple of photographers whose works that I really admire and look up to. The best we can help ourselves with is to look at the works of these photographers. There's Raghu Rai, there's Raghuveer Singh. We've all heard of Raghu Rai, but not many of us would probably be introduced to the works of Raghuveer Singh. Raghuveer Singh captures the chaos of in India in a beautiful way. And also, I want to put it out there, it's absolutely okay if you don't like any of these works. It's absolutely okay because we all have a journey of photography and we'll all take our time to get to where we want to. But it's great to always expose ourselves to the works of other photographers. There is the legendary S. Paul, who passed away some time back, Prabodh Das Gupta, who again passed some time back, and then we have Amit Mehra and Swapan Parekh, whose works you'll continue to see and whose works are also available online and you can access. So please ensure that you see the works of these photographers. Also, I would just like to put it out there that in these days of followers and likes, we also need to know what is a good photograph. And while a lot of us might not be following the works of the best of photographers, and there might not be photographers whose works are out there or are getting the most number of likes, but a good photograph is a good photograph, and a like and a follow will not change that. So I think as photographers, what we want to strive for is to producing amazing imagery, because once you put it out there, it kind of opens a lot of doors for us professionally and for us to enhance our craft and take it forward. That's all from my end. I'm happy to answer any questions that the audience might have. Thank you so much.
Madhavan, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. I keep forgetting that. Thank you so much, Saumya. Uh, that was a very lovely parting thought. I was just saying that, it is very important to measure ourselves, not just in the view of others, but also in our own perspectives, keeping our own perspectives in mind. Thank you. We have a number of questions that have come in, and some of these are from me, and most of them are from viewers. So I'm going to start with the very first question. So, Soumya, in today's situation, this is obviously, so we have a lot of parents who have joined in. So some of these questions will be from parents. In today's situation, what would you say is the scope for photography?
Uh, one of the biggest opportunities that has come in the way of photography, and it really depends on how people see it, but I would say it's an opportunity, is the digital medium. It's made the camera accessible to a lot of people. And once a young photographer, or once an enthusiast has decided to take photography seriously, I think what's important for the person to do is kind of expose themselves to the various genres of photography. you know there is a lot of scope in the kind of genres you look at. I do think the question is kind of loose ended, because it can have very different answers in depending on what genre it is. But for example, when I started, I tried myself with street photography, I tried studio, I tried photojournalism, I tried documentary, and then I decided how I wanted to go ahead. Now that I'm a photojournalist, I have the option of working with newspapers locally as well as internationally, and I get commissioned, I get to travel, and it I do think that there's a lot of opportunity that's out there for people like us. One thing that you would for sure want to know, that as photographers, you'll probably end up traveling a lot. So you need to ensure that as photographers you enjoy traveling and you explore the world, because you get to meet a lot of people and you get to interact with them and you get to see a lot of places. uh, in a lot of situations, you'll see that what the photographers do is have their feet in two boats. For example, there are genres of photography which are better paying, and there are other genres of photography which probably pay lesser, or which would have a very different lifestyle than a lot of people can take. What a lot of photographers do is balance them out. They know what is their source of income. For example, a lot of documentary photographers might decide to do weddings, and they might shoot weddings for 4 or 5 months in a year, and for the rest of the time they might shoot their own projects. So if you can be more specific in terms of the genres which you're looking for, uh, I can be more specific in terms of the answers.
This is a question that actually came across from several uh, parents. So I've sort of generalized it between them, but so the understanding that I have from the questions is that considering the COVID situation that is
Okay.
there prevalent right now. What would be the kind of career opportunities for a young photographer or young student who wants to take up photography? So that would be the more specific question in terms of what the parents are looking for.
Sure. Uh, Honestly, in these times, we don't really know where we're heading and we don't really know how things shape up. Traveling has certainly been affected with the way COVID has, affected situations. But what I see happening now is while in the earlier times, a lot of photographers needed to be based in the city capital, in the country capitals or big cities like Delhi or Mumbai or Calcutta to be getting work. Now the work is getting disseminated at a very local level. So there are assignments coming up for people, for someone who's, let's say, based in an Ahmedabad, or someone who's based somewhere in Orissa, So there are assignments coming up like that, which is certainly a big scope of opportunity, because it's only when opportunities arise that photographers are able to hone their craft and take it forward and pursue it better. So uh, I don't think photography as a medium can be obsolete. That's not the school of thought that I've come from. I do think there's a lot of scope in photography. Yes, there are also a lot of people who are doing photography right now. But the strength of your child, or your strength as a photographer, lies in the fact, how can you really make yourself stand out? It might be very competitive, so it's really important to have your niche or have your style whereby people might want to come to you. And if you have managed to get into that space where you've managed to make your work unique, then a lot of work comes in. And we see that in all the industries across various genres. The ones who are at the top of the pyramid get a lot of work. And also because of the kind of economy we have been having all this while, where there have been so many startups and there have been so many companies, we do have a lot of work that's coming out at various levels. The difference that happens is in the level of pay. If you're able to make your work stand out, you might be able to charge a much higher price than someone who is working, who's probably an early career photographer, probably a couple of years of experience. But the move happens. It's a matter of time. I would just like to put it out there that it's kind of unfair to expect photography or photographers to have careers like an MBA does. You should not expect a job to come right after you completed a course in photography. It does take time because it's a creative field. And no matter how much you learn in schools and colleges, there is certainly the field experience which is unmatched. So I would really insist that give your photography time, be patient with it, and there is work out there, and there are a lot of avenues which keep coming up every now and then for people to experiment in.
Well said, Soumya. Um, so there is a question that has been asked by someone, but this is also a very personal question to me as well. So you have achieved so much. Also, this is sort of a follow-up question because you spoke about some of the challenges that would be ahead for photographers. You have achieved so much for someone so young. So tell us about some of the challenges and secrets that you place. And Soumya, this is the last question. So this is all that we have time for today. This will be the last question of this evening. Um, so tell us some of the challenges and how you overcame them, some of the secrets of your success.
I think in terms of the challenges, the biggest problem is that our industry is unorganized, which is true for all creative industries. I have a background in BBA, so after doing my BBA, if I would have pursued an MBA, or even if I would have looked for a job right after BBA, I knew I would have gotten some job. The first shock for me was once I did my course, I did not know what to do. There was no plan of action for me. So you're supposed to make your own path, and you're supposed to find your own way. I got lucky that way is because I knew I needed some guidance, and I managed to find a photographer. I managed to find a guru in Amit Mehra, who had who mentored me and who guided me in the right direction, and which is what I like to tell a lot of people here, that if you manage to find a mentor on the field who believes in your work, it really helps you advance and your career and kind of decide on a career path, right? And I think it's in these very challenges that lie the opportunity to kind of differentiate yourself. So the first bit was about challenges. The second bit, you said, Madhvan, was about how did I uh, come over
achieve
them, right?
achieve everything, achieve so much, and it seems just a few years ago, you were just you were still a student, and you were still studying photography. When you were with Amit Mehra,
Yeah.
I remember that this was at one of the festivals, I think the Delhi Photo
Delhi
Festival,
Photo Festival, yes.
where we met, and you showed me a portfolio, and since then it's been what, 5 years or 6 years? I don't think it's been more than that.
Yeah.
You are working with the New York Times, you're working with the National Geographic. So the question is, from there to now, what were some of the what is the advice that you would give some of the younger students here, the younger people here?
Uh, I think, a couple of things worked really well for me. And I think which is something that we need to have in mind. I see a lot of talented photographers around me, and a lot of times I look at their works and I'm like, wow, I can't even do that. But I think the important thing to have is to have a vision. you know you need to be able to see a larger picture. Where do you really see yourself 10 years from now? And if that's a particular place that you see, I think what's important is to understand what you want, right? I've been in jobs, but all through the jobs, believe me, I was cribbing because I wasn't meant for a job. I always imagined myself freelancing, being by my own self and exploring by my own self. And once I got into freelancing, I got the chance to do that. But what I was also doing simultaneously, while all my jobs have been a very good experience in discipline. I can't thank my boss at HT, Gurinder Osan, enough for being patient with me and for believing in me. And there would be a lot of uh, daily mill assignments, and a lot of assignments that you didn't even want to do. But each of it's important for you to be patient and to understand that each of this is a building block in what you want to do next. And I think that patience with the entire experience and keeping an eye on what you want to do is really important. So for example, in my case, while we have the entire Indian photography scene and photojournalism scene, and I was seeing all of that, my initial exposure was actually to the international scene, because unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but for us, while we do get introduced to the works of Indian photographers, we also get introduced to a lot of international work. And just following those photographers, I realized that what are the various options I have. For example, when I was working in the various organizations, I was already applying for grants. None of the other photographers in the team, or maybe just a couple of them, were really doing that. For everyone else, it was just a job that they would come onto, and they would want to be there for the rest of their lives. But for me, it was important to be applying for grants. What grants did, for example, was, one, they got me in the discipline of working on my personal projects, longer term documentary projects. So it ensured that, as against a job where I just was supposed to go on an assignment and come back in a couple of hours, I was here going back to the same place, or the same people over years, right? And also the other thing that grants do is it's kind of an acknowledgement that what you're doing is correct, is right, you're on the right path, because it kind of puts your name out there, and it kind of makes you believe that what you wanted to do was the right thing to do. So I think it's very important to know what are the opportunities out there and kind of be after them constantly and not be deterred. Because one thing that I've learned over the years is, for example, applying for awards or grants is it's an unending process, because it's not just my photography that's being judged. Honestly, you have to understand that there are a lot of criterias that people are looking out for when they're looking for a portfolio. It's like a job. you know you might be a great photographer, but you might just not be the right fit for the job. And likewise, it works for grants, it works for awards. So I think being persistent and being at it and having a larger vision to what you want to do is really important. And obviously, uh, you know the uh, the only thing that helped me last this long was the constant mentorship that I was getting on my work, because it kind of ensured that I was uh, you know that I wasn't focusing enough, that I wasn't taking my job seriously enough, or I wasn't just doing my personal projects. So I think just having someone to kind of understand what's your temperament and kind of push you in the direction is also very helpful.
That was very, very well answered, in fact. So persistence, involvement, engagement with your, with your career and with your world. I think these are the key takeaway, and particularly mentorship, great mentorship. Just yesterday, in fact, Soumya, we had this wonderful talk about mentorship. It's not something that people usually talk about, but how do you find a good mentor? It was a talk that we had just yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Thank you so much, Soumya. Thank you so much. This concludes the Q&A session for this evening.
Thank you
Um,
very much.
Usually, as in most things, the elemental basics tend to be the greatest kind of learnings that we have, and we usually keep going back to it again and again, no matter how advanced we get in our careers and in whatever we do. And that was a very, very good talk by Soumya. And of course, as an audience, you've been an excellent audience. The conclave will continue with several other eminent speakers in the following 2 weeks on a daily basis from 6:30 p.m. onwards. Tomorrow, which is Monday, the 24th of August at 6:30, we have Prashant Vishwanathan, who's a well-known visual storyteller, who will be speaking about what's in your bag, a checklist for the new age photographer. That's going to be a very interesting topic. A checklist for the new age photographer, again from 6:30 p.m. onwards. On Tuesday, that's the day after, 25th of August, again at 6:30 to 7:30 p.m., we have Sohini Dutt, who is a producer and television anchor with CNBC TV 18, speaking about camera etiquette in an on-screen world, something that is now so essential. On the 28th of August at 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. is Dr. Pooja Vijay Sukija, who will be sharing her knowledge on presentation excellence and the secrets of speaking powerfully. You can register for any of the webinars. You can register for all the webinars. There is no cost. It is completely free, but registration is required. You can register for the webinar at pmglive.in/photo_microsite. So this concludes our fourth session of the Objective Students Education Conclave 2020 by HP and Intel in association with Better Photography. And we have many more every day again at 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Do tune in. Once again, the link is pmglive.in/photo_microsite. Well, thank you all for watching. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you, Soumya, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.